We're going to basically go through the halachas, the laws of Pesach, and I want to start off with a little introduction about why it's so important. You know, Hamas basically becomes our arch enemy, and you know, this Yom Tov has so many details around it, so many details surrounding it, and the question is, why is it so big of a deal? You know, recently we learned in Parashat Pekudei, it's an introduction to the workshop. The Medrash says that when they were building the tabernacle, they did an audit, and they couldn't find a little bit of money. This was the money, a small amount of money relative to the full amount that the Mishkan took to build, accusing Moshe of embezzling the funds, of stealing. Now, even he couldn't remember where the money went. And in the end, he remembered, oh, it was from something really small. It was known in Hebrew as the Vavei HaMudim, the hooks for the pillars. Now, these were the hooks that minor detail. And you know, it's like when you build a sukkah, you it can be very expensive to build a sukkah, and you think you make a budget for it, let's say. But one thing you don't put in the budget are the screws, because it's such a minor thing. You don't make a line item for the walls, for the schach, which is expensive, the air conditioning, the flooring. But the screws, the small nuts and bolts, the small details, you don't, you don't often financially. And you know, what do we learn from here? Soloveitchik says we learn the screws represents, you know, the minutia in Judaism, and which is halacha. You know, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, some Jews made fun of orthodoxy. And they said, you know, all that really matters is the big picture. All that really matters is that you're a good person and a kind Jew, and you rest on Shabbat, even if that means going to the beach, you know. But when it comes to halacha, we come back and we say, no, this is the Vavei HaMudim, this is that important part which holds the whole building up. Those little hooks, those little screws, that's everything. Those details, if you take that away, the whole building collapses and it implodes. And if we want this structure to stay firm and to stay strong, even the little details and minutia that of chametz, the laws of Pesach, all these little details, they hold everything together. We can't neglect them and we can't negate them. So we also can't be too consumed that we lose the forest for the trees, but still we have to be aware of the details and what that means for making Pesach. And there's even more to this, because in every mitzvah there's really a soul of the mitzvah, and then there's the act of the mitzvah, the body of the mitzvah. For example, when we pray, we stand with a siddur and we pray. When we daven, that act of physically davening is the physical action, but then if you don't have the soul, it's like a guf without a neshama, it's like a body without a soul. In chametz, it's the same. Of course, we're supposed to go through the motions of eradicating chametz and all the steps we're going to go through, but there's also the soul. And what's the soul of chametz? Chametz represents leaven, something which is left to fester, to grow. And we can find chametz in our soul. We can find chametz in our heart. We can find chametz in our lifestyle. Now, where do we see that? In ego, in in temptation. We see it in our pride. We see it in when we get jealous, and all these traits come from letting negative things fester. The why chametz is actually so severe, and it's actually compared to idol worship. There's a lot of common denominators between the severity of the prohibitions of the errors. So that's why it's asaba mashu. Even a tiny bit of chametz is a problem because of that reason. Because chametz is an issue, just like avodah zarah is an issue, a tiny bit of it. So that's why it's asa in a mixture. That's why it doesn't get annulled, and all these types of things, because that chametz we have to find within us. Because whenever we're looking for chametz, we should have in mind the next 3 weeks we're searching for, and we're on this mission to search and destroy chametz. We have to also find, in the meantime, our bad midot, our bad character traits, and eradicate them. So, Pesach begins on Monday, April 22nd at 7:38. See in a bit that some of the prohibitions start earlier that day on Erev Pesach, but Pesach finishes a week and a day later on Tuesday, April 30th at 8:41 p.m. I'll give you a better timeline at the end. Now, getting ready for Pesach is an honor, source of reward, and we want other people that see us, including our children, anyone that sees us, to realize that it's this. And and we should be on the path to get a gem. That's really how we have to be approaching it, because it's such a big mitzvah. We have to keep in mind, if our relatives and friends and kids see that it's a burden on us, then they see that that's our attitude to Pesach. They see us acting like slaves, they're going to choose freedom. So, but if they see us enjoying it, then that sets the tone. So it really sets the meaning for the year. It's the first chag in the cycle of the year. And we look for physical chametz, we look for spiritual chametz, we look for sin, for evil inclination, for addiction, physicality. And it's much more than just a spring clean. On that note, the difference between spring cleaning and Pesach cleaning, and very often people complain because say Pesach cleaning is so difficult. Here's the general rule of thumb. If you're on a ladder, or you're on your hands and knees, or you're holding a toothpick or a toothbrush, you're moving a major appliance that never gets moved, or, all these things, that's spring cleaning, right? And if it's difficult, one shouldn't blame it on Pesach cleaning, because that's not Pesach cleaning. And it's a bit different if you have kids in the house, because that means there could be food anywhere. And you might have to search in some places, not in the ceiling, but some accessible places, as we'll see in a bit. But, technically, in the olden days, when it talks about Bikas Chametz, we do that on the night before Pesach. That's when they searched their house for chametz. So granted, they're smaller houses, and chametz was less complicated, and they had all their own ingredients and all that. But still, it was a much easier process because, as we'll see in a bit, the halachas about cleaning for Pesach itself is relatively contained in the sense that it is very easily manageable. And we'll see exactly what that means in just a little bit. And it could take an average house just a couple of hours if you're following strict halacha, and you know what you're doing, and you know where to look and how to solve that you can't look or don't want to look. So, if a person's a type that they're stressed when they come into Pesach, which is a time, it's a Yom Tov, you have to be happy. Maybe a person should do the spring clean a different time of the year, which is a strange thing to say, but it's true, because it shouldn't be stressful. And they say by the Seder, the only bitter thing should be the maror, not those of us that had to clean. So yeah, if we want to get on a ladder, we want to clean the top of the ceiling fan, that's fine. But we shouldn't do that under the banner of halacha and complain about it. So, yes, the cooking for Pesach is a big deal. The kashering could be a big deal, as we'll see. But the cleaning does not need to be a big deal. So this does not negate the severity of chametz on Pesach, of course. As we'll see, there are in fact 3 positive commandments and 5 negative commandments that around Pesach. The 3 positive commandments is A, to get rid of chametz, B, to eat matzah, and C, to tell the story of leaving Mitzrayim on Pesach night. The 5 negative commandments, one of them is about eating chametz from Erev Pesach day. One of them is eating chametz on Pesach, which is very strict, punishable by kares, which is early death, tragically, chas v'shalom. Next one is a mixture, which is mixtures of chametz are also prohibited in Torah. The 4th one is you may not even see chametz that you own on Pesach. You can go to Food Lion and look at other chametz which you don't own, but chametz that you own, you're not even allowed to see in your possession on Pesach. And the 5th one is you may not own chametz. So as we see, chametz is very, very strict, and it is, as we mentioned briefly, very unique in multiple ways, that it's prohibited in a mixture. We're not even allowed to possess it. I'm allowed to own pork, but I'm not allowed to own chametz. We have a positive commandment to dispose of it that doesn't apply by any other this specific mitzvah of tashpisu, to get rid of it. And it is forbidden to benefit from chametz. You're not even allowed to use chametz as a doorstopper. You're not allowed to give it to your neighbor who's a not Jew. And it is asa b'mashu. Even a crumb of chametz is asa. That is why chametz is stressful, but cleaning for Pesach does not need to be stressful. Now, if you find chametz on Pesach, you cannot give it to your neighbor, because that would be benefiting from it. You either flush it down the toilet immediately, or on Shabbos and Yom Tov, chametz is in fact mukta, because we have no use for chametz over Pesach. Chametz is mukta, and therefore you just cover it and put it out of sight. And after Shabbos, after Yom Tov, you then get rid of it in a way that you don't benefit from it. For example, flushing it down the toilet, or in the olden days, they would burn it. Long story short, chametz becomes our worst enemy over Pesach. So what is chametz? We're going to take a tour in a second through the house and give a brief overview how to look for chametz in every place. But chametz comes from the 5 grains. That means wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. Anything that's left to rise for 18 minutes or more. And it can be shorter if it's done in heat, but that's really not for now. Flour is assumed to be chametz, besides for special kasha for Pesach flour that's used in matzah baking, which you can't really buy, in a regular store. But sometimes flour is assumed to be chametz because it's processed with acidic water before the wheat is ground into. Even though that's not done a lot, there is no kosher for Pesach flour available for purchase, in regular stores. And even if there was, it wouldn't be recommended, because even one drop of water, if you own this flour, one drop of water or moisture gets into it, it could make it into chametz on Pesach, and would then be owning chametz on Pesach, which is a biblical prohibition. So for that reason, we use alternatives like potato flour. We do not bake with flour on Pesach. Interesting to note, there are some that bake with flour on Erev Pesach. They bake matzah, but they take extreme steps to make sure that they don't own any of it, so that if any of it becomes chametz, so any of that which becomes chametz, they don't own it. So it's done in a very controlled environment, away from a home where there's going to be flour and water around. But either way, flour is not what we call actual chametz. It's just suspected chametz, made with chametz, mixtures of chametz, etc. So therefore, for those that don't sell real chametz, they can still sell flour. We'll see more about selling chametz in a bit. Now, not only food, sometimes you assume only food and drink can be chametz, but even non-food items. For example, see in the makeup discussion at the end, the things which could be edible, like lipstick potentially, or according to some, many opinions, Play-Doh is another example. Kids' Play-Doh, it's literally made with flour and water. It is very edible, because otherwise it would be illegal from a regulation standpoint to give to kids. I once got a lovely present on Pesach. Somebody gave me some Play-Doh. I was unable to take ownership of that because it was chametz on Pesach. We're not be allowed to. So that is just something to keep in mind, that chametz is almost, mostly food and drink, but doesn't always have to be. Any food that is not edible, however, that means that a dog will not eat it, is not considered chametz. It's called chametz noiksha. It's also called einor achilas kelev. Dog can't eat it. So even if, yes, there may be a hamantash behind the dryer in my utility room from when the grandchildren were visiting in 2019 before COVID, but that is most likely not edible anymore, and therefore it's not an issue, because it's not ro'el achilas kelev. It can't be eaten by a dog. It doesn't have the status of food, and therefore doesn't have the status of chametz. Now, how much chametz is an issue? We mentioned, we will see that on Pesach, even a minute amount. But when we're searching for chametz, it's a different discussion. The Mishnah Berurah in Siman Taf Mem Base, he how much we're actually looking for. And he says, obviously, we want to eradicate all chametz, all known chametz. We want to look for it and get rid of it. He does say, however, if there is chametz which is dirty and soiled, he says even of ktsas, slightly dirty, and it's less than a measurement of a kazayas, which is 30 grams roughly, around a couple of graham crackers, cookies. That is, you do not even need to get rid of before Pesach. You don't have to search for it before Pesach. Doesn't mean you want to have it lying around, but you don't have to search for it. So that means they don't need to check for crumbs, which are less than a kazayas, 30 grams or so. If they are dirty and soiled, and that means they're not edible for humans. So it doesn't have to be any more not edible for a dog to not have to search for it before Pesach. What we're looking for is edible chametz, or chametz that's more than 30 grams. That is why, to fulfill the halachic obligation, you do not need to get on your hands and knees and search with a toothbrush and start scrubbing the cracks in the corners, because that tiny bit which will be there is not edible to humans. Even though it may be edible for dogs, not edible to humans, and therefore there's no obligation as part of the mitzvah of looking for chametz and eradicating chametz to get rid of it. So therefore, when we're searching, we want to look for pieces that are bigger than a kazayas, bigger than 30 grams or so, which is not an issue if it's not edible to a dog. If it's edible to a dog, it's still a problem. And similarly, we're looking for pieces which are smaller than 30 grams, smaller than this kazayas measurement, but if it's not edible to a human, if it's edible to a human, that's what we're still looking for. We need to get rid of that. Now, not to be confused, again, just want to clarify that on Pesach, crumbs are a very big issue. But when we're talking about looking for chametz, these crumbs and these small pieces are only a problem if they are edible to a human. On Pesach, crumbs are an issue. So, for example, an example where crumbs would be an issue is on a box of matzah. You would go buy your matzah this week from Trader Joe's, from Food Line, you buy a kosher Pesach matzah, and you bring it in your house, If you put it down on the kitchen counter and then a crumb sticks to the bottom of it, and then you put it down on the Seder table, that crumb on Seder night or on any time of Pesach is a big, big problem. Because even eating one crumb of chametz on Pesach is forbidden biblically in our Torah, right? So be very careful where we put that down. The kids' Haggadahs or any adult Haggadahs, be careful where we put them down. Make sure they get cleaned if they were put down in a non-Pesach area, right? Crumb's a big issue. For that reason, I always take 2 OU Passover guides, one before Pesach, I don't care where I put it down, and one for on Pesach. That can be sure that there's not even a crumb of chametz attached to it, because sometimes it might go near my food, or I might touch my hand and eat it. So eat with those hands that touched the book. So that is a distinction to make. Crumbs are a problem on Pesach. On this note, there's another majorly underrated big issue that comes up in recent years, which is the phone phenomena. If you have a phone case and you take the phone case off, you'll notice there's crumbs all over, unless you clean it every week, which most of us don't. Inside the charger port, pockets of clothing, of coats, computers. Often we'll want to have our breakfast and have our computer right next to us because we're feeling antisocial. Pens which lie around the kitchen. All these things are very, very big issues, because even one crumb falls off any of those items on Pesach into food, or on our hands into food and into our mouth. That is a big problem. Crumbs on Pesach is a problem. So for that reason, I very much recommend cleaning one's phone, cleaning one's computer, or keeping the computer far away from food. Phones, is there people that keep their phones far away from food? Possibly, but I would do that anyway, because you hold it with your hand and it's everywhere. So I think that's a very underrated. I haven't heard many rabbis talk about that, but I think it's very, very important to clean those out, like we clean pockets out and clothing out. We should clean our phones even more so, because they end up everywhere, and there is almost always crumbs there. Next up, we have pet food. Talking about chametz, very often people will be like, "Oh yeah, I know chametz," but they'll forget that the pet needs to eat, and the pet also wants to have food, but can't have food which is chametz on Pesach, because you're not allowed to own or benefit from food which is not kosher Pesach. So I just put in the chat actually the review guide from last year. For some reason, didn't have it in this year, which had a great guide towards feeding pets, and it literally has everything. As a snake, a frog, a rabbit, doesn't matter what pet you have, a dog or cat, it can help you out. And last year's guide had a good piece on advice for pet food that can be kosher Pesach. Now, pet can eat kidneys, which is our next point. Ashkenazim took upon themselves not to eat kidneys, which is basically non-chametz produce, which they took upon themselves to consider it chametz. The first reason why they did this is because legumes and other things like that were often mixed and stored and sauced with flour. And therefore they was suspected there would be chametz there. Another reason is some say that anything that can be manipulated to look like flour and to look like chametz, they forbade. So nowadays we have Pesach cake that looks very good, but we're not adding any decrees. This is a minhag from more than 700 years ago. So this is many Ashkenazim and some Sfarim, by the way, have this custom, and we all Pesach customs we never look to change. But it's important to know that kidneys is not chametz, right? Somebody sick can have kidneys. A child can have kidneys. If kidneys touches a vessel, it doesn't make the vessel not kosher for Pesach. You can eat a Sfari. You can eat in a Sfari's house who has kidneys, as long as they tell you, hey, this is kidneys, don't have it, even though the utensils may have had kidneys in it, because we're not worried about the taste inside the walls of the pot, because it's not actual. And you can feed your pet kidneys. So it's important to know that it's not chametz, but is a custom to not have it for Ashkenazim on Pesach. So how do we get rid of real chametz? There are 3 methods that we use in this search and destroy mission. Number 1 is what we call bittul. We nullify it. We nullify it. We say any chametz that I own, from a Torah law, you can just say, I don't own it anymore, and I don't want it anymore, and I have no interest in it. You make it ownerless. You make it hefker. Now, this works for the old Hamantash that's behind my dryer, but it doesn't work for my whiskey collection, right? Also, it's actually, this has to be legit, because yes, this helps, and even helps that you can have a chametz technically lying around. You don't transgress the prohibition of seeing chametz because you don't own it, and the prohibition is only on seeing chametz that you own. But because this, is kind of sketchy. It's like I'm saying I don't want any chametz, but I have all this valuable chametz in my house. That is why the Chachamim made this mitzvah an obligation for us to search for chametz and eradicate chametz, bittul chametz and birur chametz. Because if it's right there in front of me, I might come to eat it. Even if I genuinely did make it ownerless, I may come to eat it. So the Chachamim forbade relying solely on annulling it, and therefore they said we need bedikas chametz and birur chametz, searching for chametz and getting rid of chametz. We still do annul in case we don't find it at all. So, and the last step is selling chametz, because I can get rid of my chametz and I can search for chametz. But what about my whiskey collection, my scotch collection? What do I do with that? So, for that reason, we were told that we are allowed to sell chametz. Now, we'll see in a bit. Some have different customs about this, but we are allowed to sell chametz. So, as part of bedikas chametz, which is the search mission, how do we define searching for chametz, and where do we need to search for chametz? So, the Shulchan Aruch puts it down plainly based on the Mishnah in Pesachim, which says very clearly. The Mishnah says, anywhere, kol makom she'ein machnisim by chametz, where you don't bring chametz, ein tzarich b'dicha, you don't have to check. So let's say you have this one bedroom, you never bring chametz in there, you don't have to check it. Now, you need to reiterate, if there's kids in the house, you have to assume that there's food everywhere. But generally, if there's no chametz there, you don't have to look for chametz there. And Shulchan Aruch says a person should look in all the places where there's a concern, maybe a chametz can go there. So all the rooms in the house and the upper floors you need to search, because sometimes a person might go there with bread in one's hand. Again, that's a Shulchan Aruch. And he says, however, in wine cellars, in places where one doesn't eat chametz or bring chametz, like in a straw shed or places like this, one does not need to search. Right? Pretty laid out, pretty simple about where the halachas, where the obligation to search for chametz comes. And he goes into what about holes in the wall? They didn't have fancy houses like we have nowadays. Holes in the wall or protrusions that stick out from the wall. If they're not too high or too low, that means it's a reasonable possibility that somebody put chametz there. You have to search there. But the high places that you can't reach and the low places that are lower than 3 tefachim from the ground, those places you do not have to search, because it's not reasonable to assume that there's any chametz there. So in short, number one, any area where chametz is not brought does not need to be checked. Right? So if you never sat on your ceiling fan and had a sandwich, then you don't need to check it for chametz. But if you did, you have got to check for chametz. If you never moved the dishwasher and ate a loaf of bread behind there, then you don't have to move the dishwasher and eat a loaf of bread. The second point, and a sort of a condition, any area which is not going to be accessed over Pesach doesn't need to be cleaned. So my toaster oven, which I'm just going to put away and seal and sell over Pesach, I don't need to clean it, because if I choose to spring clean it, I can. But Pesach, I don't need to clean it, because it is not a place that will be accessed over Pesach. A blender, a sandwich maker, a food processor, I'm not going to use it, and therefore I prepare it for Pesach by putting it in a cabinet and putting a piece of tape over it, marking it as sold. And I can even do the same for an entire room. I can do the same for my entire garage. My best friend before Pesach is a roll of tape. I tape it off. This is not a leniency. I tape off a room, I mark it as sold, and I put it away in a place I'm not going to be going over Pesach. When a box I'm not going to be accessing over Pesach. And I put my entire a scotch collection there, and I am good to go. I have to make sure I don't own it over Pesach, so that's why I sell it. But in terms of the issue of looking for chametz, because I might eat it over Pesach, I don't have to, because I'm not going to go there over Pesach. So let's go briefly through the house, see what that means in practice. So bedrooms, sometimes there's chametz there. Sometimes some of us may like to have a late night snack or pot noodle, ramen in our bed. That means that there's chametz there, so we have to look. We have to look properly, even for small amounts of potentially edible chametz. If we know that we never ever take food in the room, we don't have to. Mishnah Berurah says, as we mentioned, if there's kids at home, you have to assume that there's no room where the chametz didn't go, unless they can't get into that room. So, what do you do if there's a chance that I was eating pretzels over my bedroom drawers and one fell in one of the drawers? I have to check all of the drawers. I have to move aside the clothes and do a visual check. There's no need to wipe it, because I'm not putting any food there over Pesach, not the kitchen, but I need to do a visual check to make sure there's no pretzels or other chametz in my drawers, which I will access over Pesach. Right? So if you're just two adults and you have no food in the bedroom policy or no food upstairs policy, and you actually keep it, then there's no need to even do that, because there's no chance of there being chametz over there. Appliances that you have upstairs, you can either put them away, or if you never bring chametz there, you don't even have to clean them. If you might have put chametz down on top of it, then you have to wipe it down. Now, playroom, toy room. Now, given the nature of these rooms, there is always chametz there. Kids bring food in, so I would always suggest leaving out a few toys and cleaning them. Which, by the way, easy tip: you can either put them in the dishwasher if they are non-electric. You can put them in the washing machine if they're fabric, and everything else you put in a box and you tape it up, and you don't have to clean it. You just sell it, put it in a place you're not going to access it. The kids can't access it, and the playroom is ready for Pesach. You can have some Pesach toys. You don't even have to clean any toys. Just put all the toys away, take a couple of Pesach toys, give them to the kids to play with, and that's another easy solution. So it's important to know, you have to assume, because of the kids and the nature of playrooms, that there is chametz in the toys and on the toys, which might be edible, definitely not, definitely can't assume it to be inedible to a dog or even to a human. And therefore you have to clean them for chametz, but that's only if you're using them over Pesach. If you find a way to avoid that, you don't have to clean them for chametz. Floors and carpets, regular vacuum, sweep is perfect. There's no need to do any more than that. Just note that once you've done that, make sure not to bring any more chametz in that room that you've vacuumed. Mark that room which you've cleaned and vacuumed and visually checked kosher Pesach, and that way make sure not to bring any more chametz, and it's clean for Pesach. When it comes to a dresser or a cupboard, there's no reason to move it, because A, no chametz is usually brought there, and B, unless you plan to move it on Pesach, you're not even going to be accessing that area over Pesach. So I tell people that unless you especially people that like moving their furniture around, getting a new decor every so often, don't do that on Pesach, because if you do, every way which you plan to move, you have to clean and search for chametz before Pesach. If you don't move anything around before Pesach, you don't have to move any of those heavy appliances, heavy utensils, heavy dressers before Pesach. Now we come downstairs, and let's say we look at the bookshelf. Same two conditions apply. Exactly same two. This is the rule of the two conditions. If the books A have come in contact with chametz, you bring it to your breakfast table, you eat breakfast over it, you bring it to the Shabbos table, and B, they will be accessed over Pesach, then you have to clean them. You have to visually check them or bang them out, make sure that there's no crumbs in them, because even one crumb could be an issue. If they never came into contact with chametz, then you don't have an issue. If they came into contact with chametz and you're not going to use them over Pesach, then what you have to do is just seal them off with one piece of tape, and that's it. You don't have to even move them before Pesach. So, keeping books away from food is a golden rule, but you don't need to do that as long as you're not using these same books on Pesach. But if you are using the same books on Pesach that you used with food around the year, just make sure to clean it properly. And that way, those are the only books you have to clean, really. The other ones which came into contact with food, you just mark as sold or mark as not for Pesach. Kids' books, which you want to use over Pesach, got to be more careful with. Even if you didn't think they came into contact with food, you have to assume they came into contact with food, put them all away. You can wipe down a few, keep them for Pesach, or as we did with the Pesach toys, you can buy some Pesach books. Now we come to the kitchen, where you take the same approach, but this time assume there's food everywhere. So first you have to figure out what am I going to use over Pesach in this kitchen? Which cupboard is going to be my Pesach cupboard? You're not going to need all that space that you normally have for the year round. And any appliances or any doors that you're not going to be using over Pesach, you just close them off or move them out if you can, and tape them off and mark them as not for Pesach, mark them as sold. You'll have these 1 or 2 cabinets that you're going to need for Pesach. These must be emptied and they must be wiped down properly, because again, crumbs are a problem. If you take out a Pesach pot from a shelf that has 1 crumb and you end up consuming that crumb on Pesach, it's a big problem. So even because that, we very much strongly recommend covering the shelves. That can, A, take away some of the stress of cleaning it if it's covered properly, and B, that's a way to ensure that no crumbs end up, because it's very, very hard sometimes to 100% clean cabinets. It's possible, but it just could be time consuming. So yes, there will be that 1 or 2 cabinets which you're going to need for Pesach. and we will clean them properly and cover them. And that way we can be confident that there's not going to be any crumbs on Pesach. And now that moves on to some of the things that we're going to need over Pesach, like sinks and other appliances, which we want to know, can we kasher them? So first of all, smaller things like spoons and forks and all these types of things, utensils and even pots, can be kashered in boiling water. And we're going to do that in the shul here on Sunday in 2 weeks, April the 14th, between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. So you can bring any small things to the shul, and we will kasher them for you. Next up, we have how do we kasher all the big things? So first you have to understand the principles of kashering. First one is what we know as tam ka'ika, that the taste in the wall of a pot is like food itself. That means you cannot just clean a pot and say, oh, it's clean, therefore I can use it on Pesach. No, if it's a chametz pot and it's been used for hot chametz, we assume that whatever it is, the taste of the pasta is in the walls. And this taste is not just taste, it is real food. It's like the ikar. And therefore, if we cook with that pot on Pesach, it will put the taste into the thing, and the whole thing gets the status of chametz. So that's why we have separate pots for meat and milk. So for that reason, everything needs to be kashered, or preferably have new for Pesach, makes it easier. So even though after 24 hours the taste becomes pogum, it's not ben yom, it tastes bad. This taste inside the wall of the pot, but we still have to kasher. We just kasher after 24 hours. Now, all utensils have to be 100% clean before kashering. So let's say you're going to bring it to the shul to kasher it, you're going to make sure that's 100% clean. And it's not been used for 24 hours prior. So how do we kasher? So if the general rule is the same way the taste went in, that's how the taste comes out, which means if it's a pot which you use with boiling water, that means the taste of the chametz went into the walls of the pot using water. You have to kasher it with boiling water. If the taste went in with fire, such as an oven, the heat of a flame, the heat of a red hot element, it will only exit with fire. Some say that one can kasher with steam. It's very complicated, but because that's basically the same as kashering with water. You have to get it up to temperature, as we'll see in a second what that means. So this is it is better to also, after kashering, put the utensils, especially small utensils which you can, into cold water to cool it down as quick as possible. So we're going to briefly go over the laws of kashering, but thankfully there are some incredible resources around, including the OU's guide for kashering, the CRC's guide for kashering, and these things are really great resources because they list all the different utensils, how to kasher them, the things to look out for. And actually we have linked on our website, dartikva.org/Pesach. If you go down to guides, all different guides, including apps that you can use, and you can literally have an app right in front of you. To phone the rabbi, and you can kasher any utensil that is eligible to be kashered, as we'll see in a second, right, with instructions from a credible source. So yeah, the OU guide also actually have on page 60, 61, 62, 4 pages of kashering guide, but it's not as comprehensive, I think, as the CRC, which I just put in the chat. But either way, so start with a sink. A sink absorbed chametz through heat. You put your hot pasta in it, whatever it is. We assume that the whole thing is absorbed with chametz as it normally is. Therefore, we kasher with boiling water on the surface of the sink. Now, it does need to be kasherable. Therefore, if it's metal, it's kasherable. You can kasher that. Metal absorbs, and it can also be purged. Earthenware, on the other hand, absorbs, but it cannot be purged halachically. Therefore, you can't kasher earthenware. You can't kasher glass. Ashkenazim can't kasher it. Glass is an issue. So you have to be careful when even purchasing a sink not to buy a porcelain sink that cannot be kashered. If it ever gets tray fits it. So if a sink is metal, you can kasher it, however. So we would have to cover a porcelain sink and make sure not to use hot water as well over Pesach. So you'd have to cover it and not use hot water in a porcelain sink. Now, how do you actually kasher the sink? You clean it properly, including the drain, by the way. That's often where the gunk gets held up, which is food. You wait 24 hours with no hot liquid. You can put a big X over the sink to make sure no one uses it. Then you pour boiling hot water. When we talk boiling hot water, it has to actually be bubbling. You're talking about 212 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 degrees Celsius, literally boiling water. Um, that's why many are strict. Even when they're using a kettle to kasher, they keep the button held down whilst it's on the base to make sure that it's actually still bubbling when you're kashering. So it's not you should never wait for the water to stop bubbling. Splashing water over the whole thing doesn't really work. It's not good enough because, whilst the water was hot in the first place it touched, it almost certainly was not hot enough when the last place it touched. So you have to actually physically pour hot water over every part of this hot sink, of the sink. And you also have to remember to kasher the knobs of the tap, the spout, and the full tap. And very importantly, in America, it's very common. You have this hose that you pull out. You have to pull out the hose and kasher the whole thing. Now, some say, well, it's plastic, and especially soft plastic, you can't really kasher. So we do basket that you can kasher hard plastic, following most authorities. And in regards to soft plastic, for that reason, some people don't pull out the hose the whole Pesach because they're concerned about the kashering of that hose element of the tap. But it just goes to show how much detail I have to show to kasher every single part of the sink with direct boiling water on every part of it. You cannot just say, well, I put some hot water somewhere in the sink where it rolled over the rest of the sink. Countertops, we have to clean the countertops very well. And again, leave them 24 hours and then pour hot water over every part. Don't splash it. You have to walk with the hot thing and be very careful and pour. And the general rule of thumb that I often tell people is if there isn't water all over, you probably didn't do it right. It's like, checking for lettuce. Somebody ever says, I never find any bugs in lettuce. But you're probably not checking right. So countertops are a little bit more complicated because they can be made out of multiple different things. You can pick the CRC guide, they have a big list. But generally, formica and wood, they can be kashered. Scratches, you have to be careful. Scratches on wood could be an issue. Granite can be kashered, but lots of those other complicated countertops, you should check the comprehensive list that they have to see where they can be kashered or not. An alternative would be covering it. Covering is a easy solution. You have to cover it properly, make sure it doesn't rip over Pesach. We often say with 2 layers of heavy duty aluminum foil. And you have to be conscious to make sure to cover every part and cover it properly. That is often an easier solution. And this is especially important because there's a rule in kashering. If you're worried that it's going to break while you kasher it, the kashering is not valid because we're concerned that you didn't do it properly. So that basically means that if you're worried, let's say you've got a brand new kitchen and if you pour water over the whole counter, the wood cupboard doors beneath it are going to get ruined and become warped. Then no, that kashering was not good because you probably did it half self-conscious and a little bit hesitant, and it has to be done properly. So in such a case, I would say just cover the counter with 2 layers of heavy-duty aluminum foil. When I grew up at home, we had 2 layers of kitchen surface. When we bought the kitchen, we bought 2 layers, and we just used to bring one and put it down on Pesach, add it on top. Made the kitchen feel much different, much higher and everything. Definitely gave us a Pesach feel. There's a lot of schlepping involved, but there was no hot water on the counters. We didn't have hot water. We could avoid that by covering surfaces properly. A microwave. So a microwave becomes somewhat through heat, through steam. So some say you can kasher it by using boiling water. How do we do that? First of all, you should be careful with the glass tray because Ashkenazim say that can't be kashered. So we clean it very well. Let's say you have a separate glass tray. You clean it very well. You spray caustic spray everywhere where it's hard to reach to try and make any potential remnants of food inedible. And you leave it for 24 hours. Then you use a microwave safe styrofoam cup filled with water and preferably a little bit of soap to add to any potential taste that's left to make it be a bad taste, make it pogum. Then you leave that for 10 to 15 minutes until the entire thing is filled up with boiling hot steam, hopefully up to the right temperature of 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you have to do it again in a different place because the place underneath the styrofoam cup didn't become kashered because that was covered. So you have to kasher that spot as well. So you do the same thing again. A convection microwave, by the way, is more similar to an oven, which we'll come to now. An oven, if it has self-clean, and by self-clean I mean non-aquatic self-clean, because aquatic self-clean does not get up to the correct temperature. If you have a regular, good old-fashioned self-clean, it gets hot enough to be called libun gomel. This is proper, really, really hot, and you can actually check this. If you put a wooden spoon inside, don't try it, but if you do, If you put a wooden spoon inside of an oven, you put the self-cleaning cycle on, come back, it'll just disintegrate into ash because that's how hot an oven gets. And therefore, you don't even need to clean it because the heat burns everything out. It is proper libun. And this complete high temperature self-clean cycle should be run with the racks inside the oven because otherwise it's very difficult to kasher. And the oven then may be used for Pesach without even covering the racks. This kashering can be done even if the oven was not left unused for 24 hours. The reason being because libun gomer, this extreme temperature of 400-500 degrees Fahrenheit that the oven gets up to, is okay even without waiting 24 hours. It's considered like red hot in terms of kashering levels. If the racks are not inside the oven, then which I said is complicated because those also need to get to red hot temperature. If it is a different type of oven, if it's a non-self-clean oven, or some people are very self-conscious about doing self-clean because it can break the oven if you use too often, which shows how powerful it is. You have to clean the oven very, very well. And that means literally get into the screws and the nuts and the bolts because every bit of grime over there could be food and is chametz, could be chametz, and even a drop of it, even a taste of it is a problem. Therefore, you have to get inside of the oven, literally climb inside. I've done this many times, and you scrub it. Here in the shul, we literally unscrew those. We have a team of cleaners that unscrew the nuts and the bolts, and then we clean it 100%. Literally, almost makes the oven look brand new. We wait 24 hours, and then we put it on the highest for 1 hour. This is nowhere near the level of self-clean, but it is a form of kashering libun kal, which can be done if it is 100% clean and has not been used in 24 hours. Stovetops. Now, the kashering of stovetops, including glass stovetops, is done as follows. Now, all parts of the stovetops should be thoroughly cleaned. Absolutely no remnants of any food or grime or dirt that could be food there. And this includes scraping residual food from the surface, from the catch tray, and it shouldn't be used for 24 hours. Then fire or the coil, whatever you have, whatever type of stovetop you have, should be turned to the maximum temperature for at least 30 minutes. Now, it is acceptable to kasher burners for keeping them on each one for 10 minutes or so, and not the full 30 minutes, because otherwise things can get dangerously hot, especially if you put them all at the same time. But you do have to ensure that it's full heat. Sometimes if you put them all at the same time, they don't actually all get to full heat. So you have to be very cognizant on how exactly your stovetop works. Another alternative for a glass stovetop to be aware of is not to kasher at all, but in case instead you put all pots onto metal discs. You can actually buy them on Amazon, and you put those, that way the pots don't have any contact with the stovetop at all. Either way, if you're kashering it after it's cooled down, you pour boiling water over the surface. Even for Ashkenazim and even for a glass stovetop, you can do this. And on Pesach, you should still not put anything down on the areas in between the burners if it's a glass burner. And this is the reason being, again, because glass cannot be kashered according to Ashkenazim for Pesach. And gas is a problem. According to Ashkenazim, glass needs to be kashered. It can't be kashered. According to Sfarim, glass doesn't even need to be kashered. But either way, Ashkenazim, that's why it's a problem. So we shouldn't put down any food, any pots, especially hot, on anywhere in between the burners. The burners themselves, however, because they get so hot, it's almost as if those can be kashered, or it's as if they didn't absorb food in the first place. But the parts in between we have to be very careful of. Afterwards, the rest of the stovetop we have to worry about still. So we have to cover some areas with foil. We have to cover the knobs. We have to cover the catch tray if you have one, and all the areas in between the burners, ideally, if there's a risk of putting down food. And then areas behind the burners where the food, sometimes you push a pot back and it touches the wall behind, or some metal safety over there behind. And if there's any food residue on the underside of the stove's hood or above on the machine, which takes away the bad scents, these all should be thoroughly cleaned before Pesach. Refrigerators and freezers. So every part of a refrigerator and freezer which will be used over Pesach, including the storage bins, has to be thoroughly cleaned and washed. This includes the rubber around the door. You'll be surprised how many crumbs you find in there, probably enough to feed a hungry family. And if it's too tough, sometimes there are areas which are too tough, use a caustic spray, a tough spray that will at least make the food inedible to a dog. That way, even if a crumb does fall in our food on Pesach, it's not a problem. The shelves should be lined with plastic or foil, even though it was cleaned. Which should be, you should be careful just to keep the air circulation in the fridge or freezer. I've seen that unfortunately happen, and people, why am I back of my fridge freezing up over Pesach? Because there's too many bags and foil, which is not allowing the air circulation. So the reason why we cover the shelves of the fridge and freezer is because of how many crumbs are in every fridge and freezer. So we should be very, very careful, and they can get stuck in any nook and cranny. Freezers should be defrosted before cleaning, because it doesn't help cleaning if there's crumbs inside the ice, in and around the ice. And even then, it is better to put everything into bags inside the freezer over Pesach, and that's all the better. Some people are strict; they put it into 2 bags, and then they bring it. On their way to the kitchen, they take on Pesach, they take the outer bag off, so the inner bag definitely doesn't have crumbs. And this just speaks to how dirty fridges and freezers can be, especially freezers. But freezers should be defrosted before kashering, and then if you use a bag, that way it ensures that even not kashering, before cleaning, and that way if you use a bag, it ensures that even crumbs don't make it to the kitchen or into any food. Dishwasher. Many say you can't kasher a dishwasher. It has many crevices and hollow areas which are not so accessible, and food gets there with heat, and it cannot be cleaned properly. Also, some say it has plastic, which many in the US, they follow Rav Moshe, and say you can't kasher. So even for those of us that do allow kashering, it's only for year-round use and not for Pesach. So a person shouldn't kasher a dishwasher for Pesach. A Keurig, espresso machine, those we should clean, wait 24 hours, take out the area that holds the cup and put it into boiling water. And then you should buy a kosher for Pesach Keurig cup and run it through the machine. Just check the OU guide has a list of cups that are okay for Pesach. If next up is a hot water urn, like we have in Shabbos or Yom Tov, to give us hot water. If an electric hot water urn stays on the counter during the year, it should be kashered in order to be able to use on Pesach, or buy a separate one for Pesach. This is because during the year, somebody might have warmed it up a challah on it, or poured water directly on it, or poured water directly onto instant noodle soup, or touched some hot chametz, or touched chametz, which became up. In this context, there is an opinion of Gedalia Dov Schwartz that says that if the type of urn is never brought to the table, and this family is 100% sure that it was never used for touching chametz, heating chametz, pouring onto chametz, and never even inadvertently came into contact with hot chametz, or became splashed with chametz, then it could be used for Pesach without kashering, if it's clean, obviously. But most homes are not disciplined enough to reach that level of confidence, and therefore should kasher the urn or get a separate one for Pesach. Hot plate. Glass top hot plate or a warming tray cannot be kashered because glass. A metal top can. Clean it well, wait 24 hours, plug it in for an hour, or if it has settings, put it on the highest. Cover it with tin foil, and then you can use it on Pesach. Tablecloths. So fabric tablecloths can be used for Pesach just after regular laundry. Vinyl tablecloths should not be used and should be replaced for Pesach. So that's it really with the kitchen. Like I said, other specifics you can find in the kashering guides. So now we're very, very briefly, we'll look at some ingredients, but again, the guides and the apps are really, really useful for medicines, cosmetics, and toiletries, etc. So the CRC write as follows, and I'm going to quote because it's a great, easy way to say it. All varieties of blush, body soap, conditioners, cream, eyeliners, eyeshadow, stick deodorant, foundation, lotion, ointments, mascara, nail polish are permitted on Pesach, regardless of ingredients. They are not edible. They're not edible. Liquid deodorants, perfume, color spray, sunscreen, shaving lotion, and wipes, however, they have an ingredient which is called denatured alcohol. This can be edible. This can be a problem. So you should check those in the list. I think I mentioned last year that there was a former presidential candidate in 1988. His wife, I won't say her name, her initials start with KD. She drank hairspray. She wrote about it, and aftershave and perfume as part of an alcohol addiction. So when people say, well, it's not food, well, it's technically edible, and certainly edible to it's not considered inedible to a dog. So that's why these things, we should be careful to check those in a list. A lot of them are okay, just check them in the list. Lipstick, mouthwash, and toothpaste. Common denominator between these three is they all go in our mouth or close to our mouth. These, if they contain comments, should not be used. The OU and the CRC have lists of which ones are okay. Now you could be saying, well, what ingredient in toothpaste could possibly be chametz? There's no bread in it. Well, just about every variety of toothpaste has sorbitol. Sorbitol is created from hydrogenating glucose, and glucose is derived from chametz. Sometimes from wheat, and it could be from kidneys, and it could be from sometimes innocuous ingredients, something which is not chametz. So, although most glucose and sorbitol in the US is not made from chametz, you can't recommend toothpaste because many of it is. So, therefore, toothpastes are a problem, as are lipstick, as a mouthwash, because of some ingredients like sorbitol and other such ingredients. So, toothpaste also, by the way, can have common other more minor ingredients that have chametz concerns. So that's why we should check them in the list. Of course, one should get a new toothbrush for Pesach, and lipstick, which is okay. Just clean the top of the lipstick if we used it before Pesach to make sure, again, there's no crumbs. Medicine, this one's pretty simple. Any prescribed medicine we should continue taking. Rav Moshe Feinstein says these are not food. Take any risks, you continue taking any prescribed medicines, no questions. This is talking about swallowable medicines. Chewable medicines, however, contain a lot of extra ingredients which make them chewable and make them dissolvable. So chewable and dissolvable medicines should be checked. Vitamins. So if they're told by a doctor we have to take them, we can rely on Moshe. We check them out. Star K have some great lists for medicines and vitamins. And these vitamins, they do contain chametz. They could contain chametz, and they sometimes contain kidneys. We'll finish, right about done. We will finish with a quick timeline of how Pesach looks this year, 5784-2024. So right now, other than looking for chametz and getting rid of chametz, we have to sell our chametz or sign the document allowing me to sell your chametz on your behalf. Those who are traveling should do this, should tick the box on the form that they're traveling, and that sale will be done a day beforehand. That will absolve you of the need to search for chametz in your house on the night of the 14th on Leil B'dikas chametz. The majority of the sales will be done on the 14th. This also helps, by the way, for travelers who will be out of the time zone. Let's say they'll be in Israel, where it's forbidden to own chametz 7 hours before it is over here. If we sell chametz on Erev Pesach morning, that means they owned it for a couple of hours, and then when they weren't allowed to, so that we do the travelers sale for them on Mechiras Yud Gimel on Sunday this year. It will be on the 13th of Nisan rather than the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach. Some people don't sell real chametz. Some people, they sell real chametz, only scotch and no other real chametz. So you should see the OU guide they actually have on page 59 of this year's OU guide, a great overview of what is considered real chametz for those that have this custom, if they want to know what they can sell and what they can't. It is best to mark every room and every cupboard and appliance which is sold as sold. That way it is clearly demarked. That way nobody's going to open it and take out a loaf of bread and eat it over Pesach if you're selling a loaf of bread. So that is all things that we should do now: selling chametz, searching for chametz, and eradicating chametz. On Sunday, April the 21st, in that night, that's the mitzvah b'dikas chametz. After nightfall, after 8:34 p.m., we should search with a bracha and a post-search recital. Both of those can be found on our Pesach webpage in our Erev Pesach primer. Then we come to Erev Pesach itself on Monday, April 22nd. That is also Tanis B'Tzeres, the fast of the firstborns. We will have Shachar 7 a.m. followed by a bagel siyam for firstborns. This will be outdoors because we don't want to end up with chametz inside on Erev Pesach. We will sell the chametz at 10 a.m. The latest time to eat chametz is at 10:37 a.m. this year, and the latest time to burn and to nullify chametz, special nullification recital that we say, is at 11:57 a.m. We will be burning chametz at the shul, so you can bring chametz here to fulfill the mitzvah of burning chametz, which is also a mitzvah to eradicate chametz. The mitzvahs at Seder night, on Pesach night, on Monday night, April 22nd, are A, to tell the Pesach story, especially to our kids. B, 4 cups of wine, ideally wine, proper and ideally red. C is matzah. D is maror. 4th mitzvah is maror, which is including during koreches, should be raw and unpreserved. And we have to make sure to have the right amount of matzah, the right amount of wine, the right amount of maror. There isn't like a magic potion. You eat a drop of matzah, you fulfill the mitzvah. It's very specific. It isn't a taste test. They actually have an amazing diagram, the OU guide on page 19, I think, which specifies exactly what a piece of matzah that fulfills the mitzvah for each part of the Seder is. So how big it is. You can see on the OU guide on page 18, they have a helpful chart, and healthy people should try to use the bigger measurement of matzah, the bigger measurement of maror, the bigger measure of wine, to make sure that they fulfill the mitzvah according to the most authorities. By the way, maror and lettuce and other vegetables should be checked. The way we check lettuce is we soak it in water and a little bit of special vegetable salt. We agitate it, then we drain it, we inspect it under direct light. And you can check on page 60 of the OU guide. I don't think they actually have it in this year, I'm not sure. They had it in last year for sure. With the details about how to search for chametz. They actually had a cool title. It was called "The Guests That You Don't Want Over Pesach," and it's referring to the bugs. So we shouldn't forget to do that as well. Chol Hamoed is from Monday, April 24th till Sunday, April 28th. Second days of Yom Tov starts on Sunday night, April 28th, and then it's Monday and Tuesday, April 30th. Pesach finishes at 8:41 p.m. on Tuesday, the 30th of April. The earliest time we should eat the chametz that we sold, probably about 9 o'clock, because we should make sure that we're not stealing it from the non-Jew, Mike Fiol, who we're going to sell the chametz to. So if you eat it earlier, you might be stealing from him. So we have to be careful. So either way, thank you for listening. We wish you a Pesach kosher v'sameach, a kosher and Pesach, a happy Pesach. And you can always go to the website, /Pesach or /Passover, both in the same place. And you can always, of course, ask me questions at any time. Thank you so much for listening, and have a happy Pesach.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.